Okay, I've been wasting my time in this crisis doing things like this. For if I want to automatically make a little button, and we have so you see these numbers come from the dependent sheet, and I want to automatically make a button that shows colors where the files are going. For some reason, my friend said, "Oh, that's a necessity. We have to have that." I don't quite understand why. I've been messing around with that, but that's not what this video is about. This is about a solar project finance model in part two. I did part one, and I didn't do part two. I didn't make a explanation of part two. Now, uh, and this is a solar project. So in this, I'm kind of nervous again. I'm practicing this. I'm probably going to mess it up because I'm going to do this for this my friend's a university class. Oh my God, are they going to be in for some torture? Okay, and I made a little video on the operating model last time. Now that little thing I showed you is going to be part of this generic macros, which I keep on messing around with too. Let me. I forgot to color some of these other sheets, didn't I? So am I putting this thing in column B, I think. So we better put it in B. I hope you see kind of how I did that. This one doesn't have a sum column. It might have some marks to the other sheets. This time I'm going to take the tab color from another sheet, and I'm not going to bother with excuse me, the shoot, I have a little thing there. Okay, so we made our scenarios before, and we made our operating model before. I'll still have a problem with this one. This one, it automatically figured out that this was in column I, and I'm going to also mark links from the other sheets just to put us back to where we are, and then to go through some of the things we're going to work on now. I forgot to put this top color on here because we should have had a top color of about 10. And if you're very, very irritated with me now, you can turn off the video. You're probably very irritated that I'm wasting my time on the coloring, but I'm not wasting my time. I'm showing you how to you not to waste your time with this kind of crap all the time. Okay? And now, so now we're gonna, so the real innovation, just to remind you, was that we could use this little find function, month, that, I can't get a word out. Now we'll go to the financing model. There's not all that much new here, a little bit perhaps, but hopefully we're putting it together. So we're going to first make a little part of this that size of the debt. Again, I'm going to go through most of the formulas, but not absolutely every one of them. Okay, and then I'm going to demonstrate how absolutely essential it is. I know probably 90% of you, and especially the real, I don't know why anybody really fancy would be watching this. They think they're too good for it anyway, whatever. But if you're watching this, the value of having a summary sources and uses of funds statement, and the value of having that both for making the circular references and also for coming up with the debt and the equity is, for me, is very, very important. And also, finally, for being able to change your model from a structuring model where the sculpting drives the debt size to a risk analysis model where you put the scenarios I just showed you and do some downside. So I'll go through some total funding needs that includes all of the interest during construction and everything else. And look at this, excuse me, I didn't kind of do all that, so we better blank that out. And then we're going to go through the funding part. And I think it's absolutely essential to get some of this funding from the summary sources and uses of funds statement. the other thing to do is make your model very flexible, so it's very easy to change between pro rata funding and equity fund up front, and even put a little mixture of that in. Okay, and I hope I'll be able to do that. And excuse me, I better zero this out so I don't cheat. Oh, I guess I did. I'll copy it across. Okay, and then I'm gonna, once we have the kind of debt funding ready, then we'll begin the debt balance with the repayment. And the first thing we'll do is we'll use our sculpted repayment that sized the debt right at the beginning. It's this enormous kind of circular reference. It's the kind of circular reference. And perhaps I better put a yellow one here, because this is the, no, not this one. Ah, shoot. This one. I think I'm going to put one here. Okay, fine. I'll do one both. And we get our total repayment. We get it from way upstairs, and I hope I might have to. I got the repayment up here, and I might have to change a little thing here, because I want to be able to take one repayment that's a dynamic. My friend calls that a dynamic repayment, and the other repayment is fixed. And when we fix the repayment, it's basically kind of not so complicated. All it is a really basic copy and paste. But we're going to we're going to use a little lookup function, because what happens if you fix the repayment, but then you want to move over that fixed repayment because you've got a cut my words out. You've got a delay in the construction, and you want to push that fixed repayment back to the COD, or the COD plus even a grace period. I got that word out. And then we'll put a repayment and a cash sweep in. Now, when I did this other little video that nobody seemed to like that much, and I said, okay, you really want to look at the PLCR, and if you're having a really gigantic downside, you want to really test what happens. You want to test whether that the defaults can really be repaid. In fact, that's how you can almost prove what the PLCR really, really means. Okay. And so we're going to work through a default on the debt, and then we're going to put this default on the debt downstairs in the financing section. And finally, we'll get a little cash flow waterfall. And I'm also going to, I seem to have left that one out, but I'm going to talk about a cash sweep, which I haven't talked about in a very long time, I think. And then we'll compute the PLCR, not just for one period, but for the future periods. And we have a changing interest rate. And I've made an old ancient analysis of that, but I can't remember it. So I'm going to redo that. All right. So let's go and get started. Now, this number comes from the operating model. So that's going to be, one day, it's going to be a brown number. And that's this big issue that I just talked about. So when we push something to the operating model, the question is, do you really want that to be a different color in this sheet? Maybe. Okay. Why not? And so I'm going to take this now. I shouldn't really tell you this, but I cheated. I cheated a lot, because the taxes, there's an enormous circular reference for taxes and interest when you do your sculpting. If you haven't done much, it might be new to you, but it's a pretty obvious one, because the interest expense drives the CFADS, the taxes drive the CFADS drives the debt size, but the debt size drives the interest. Oh, we got one. debts and the UDF. Now, I'm reworking the UDF to make it more and more and more user friendly and realistic to add into any of your models. So either you can do it or you can apply a kind of a template thing I've been working on. Okay, and then we're going to put a standard thing. Now, when I do these things, it drives me kind of crazy, and you're going to get mad at me, and you're not going to change. I know you're not going to change, but I think you should always decide on whether you're going to use the beginning or ending. I always will use the beginning. And this bull crap of trying to sometimes use the beginning and ending and getting all confused with switches, I swear it will be a lot easier if you don't. And then we're going to put our very standard kind of calculation that the cash flow divided by our DSCR that's what drives the debt. And this is this philosophy I'm practicing for this class again, this fundamental philosophy of whether cash flows drives the debt size or the amount you spend drives the debt size. The cash flow drives the debt size. Again, a DSCR, that's like a buffer you leave when you do a Google Maps. And when you do a Google Maps and you get lost like me, you need to leave extra time. That's what the real DSCR is. I don't get to even walk to my cheap little hotels anymore, so I'm really sad. And then we have to remember that this credit spread, and here's another thing I'm going to moan about. I'm going to use our again, I hope you don't yell at me about the coloring. Yell at me, you can just send me one of those little comments or something. Uh, uh, but when you set up these things, I have seen 9 out of 10 people, when they do the credit spread or they set up the credit spread, they will not put it side by side. They'll put it down. And then you're going to have to make some long calculation for the credit spread. And then our total rate is the credit spread plus the base interest rate. And again, I don't have Bloomberg. I needed Bloomberg for a study or something of this whack crap that whatever they do. People believe this shit still. Whatever. Where am I? The periodic rate, that's just, we just take that annual rate, divide it by 12, multiply it by our key little thing here, months per period. What I might not have got my sentence out. Keeping all of these key things in sight and nothing else is such a big deal. Learning what to keep in sight. These are big deals. And then we're going to take our index, and some people highly object to that little one. And they say, oh, the auditors won't let me do that. Tell them to go to hell. What, you can have a little one there. And if they have some canned program, and now we're just starting this index here. Okay, and then we're going to do a standard sculpting formula, and I forgot to zero it out, but we'll take the sum product, and we'll first see how much debt service, and this absolutely fundamental formula in project finance, that the present value of the debt service is the size of the debt. And when you do this, and make a little debt balance, and we'll make a little debt balance up here, and actually that's kind of important. This is all still in our debt sizing from sculpting section. And how could you have done this debt sizing from sculpting without doing the cash flow first? And our repayment is our total. DSCR is repayment minus, it's the total debt service minus the interest. And we don't know the interest, but we'll use the opening balance. It's an absolute necessity to use the opening balance. Now I kind of cheated here and made a little, this was the COD minus 1. So we put all our, and this was the total NPV of the cash flow. We put that here. Our closing balance, I'm using a positive number convention. I really don't get emotional about this. And then I'm going to take the interest, and I'm going to use that periodic interest rate we did. And that's the standard. Oh, shoot. Oh my God, what did I do wrong? the opening balance. Did I just do the closing balance after I said I was going to do the opening balance? Oh my gosh. Okay, so that's our thing. Now, what I should have done is put a little test. And the easiest way to make a test for me is to remember use a lookup function. That's about the only function you really need, and look up when the repayment is finished. This is when the repayment is finished, and then of course we always use the beginning date, and then we go and get the total closing balance, and when it's finished, that better be zero, and that's good news so far. Um, and excuse me, I didn't. It's not very good news because I didn't even put the opening balance in. Okay, and then I'm checking it by hand. That test, I'm kind of contradicting myself a little bit. It went to zero. This should be like a beauty. This should be something that just says, this is smooth. The world is working. That's art. That's sculpting. It's a beautiful sculpture. Bullshit. Then now, once we do this, and I don't know why I did this, I just said, okay, let's get all of our fundamental Capex. Whoops, I'm down into the LCOE. And I started with my EPC contract, and I said my legal cost, a minuscule 90,000 to those lawyers. We can get about 1 or 2 hours of work for them, probably, for that. Oh God, and then they'll just copy and paste the documents, obviously. I'm sorry. Well, no lawyers will be watching this, will they? And now this is a big one. When we get to interest during construction, we're going to have a fixed number, and I put the fixed up here, and perhaps I should have moved this fixed down to the financing cost because that's where it applies. And we're going to have to put this fixed in, and then we're going to make a little copy and paste at first. I'm going to do a copy and paste. And in this little example, if you put all of your, summarize all of your circular references into this little table, it won't be a big deal. Now, the debt sizing that we get can either come from a debt to capital ratio, which is 80%. I don't know if I should have put this here or somewhere else. Maybe I should have moved this here. This is a big deal. Okay, and maybe I should have moved this 80%. So we could either get the debt to capital from the 80%. Now, when I am, making these online classes now and all that stuff, I have to survive. And because I hate, I have to admit, it kind of works. And then we get the DSCR method. When I'm doing this online, I'm going to teach you how to do the sculpting. In one of my classes, I'm gonna do that. And then I have, if it's true, then we'll take this. Otherwise, I'm just going to take the DSCR. What I really should do is take the minimum of these two. And I'm not doing that right now because the sculpting, when you have a debt to capital constraint, and when this thing drives the model, it's one of the most complicated issues. That and sculpting multiple issues, and what else? Doing some refinancing. There's some things that are really tough, and that's one of them. Now, to get the EPC costs, so I'm sorry. So this is the summary. And I didn't do this. I thought maybe this will be a little too complicated for people in the university, but I'm going to do it now. So here's the big deal. I believe that when you, I think there might be another way to do this, but I believe for me, I just take this 100%. And now again, keep this so it's really easy to find this. This is the equity up front. So we're funding 100% equity up front and zero pro rata. I'm going to change that to 50%. I'm going to change that to 40%. I'm going to change that to 60%. What a ass. And then I'm going to press, whoops, not F5. I just pressed the, you can't see what I'm pressing. Can I still press the F5 to get me back? No. Yes, I can. Okay. And if you just put your inputs like that and allow people to go and find them easily, I'll tell you that makes a gigantic difference, because when I'm reviewing other people's models, which sucks so bad, it's really bad. So now once we have our the amount we put up front, this was our upfront equity, then we can take the difference and get the pro rata and the total debt we get from here. And then we can say, okay, well, the total pro rata that's not upfront is just these two, and then we can divide that total pro rata into two things. That's Hetty did that, and it's really a great innovation, I think. And then we can get our, now I'm going to put our move to the section that does the funding instead of on a total basis, on a periodic basis. And I hope you can see the value of having that summary thing up front. And what I hope this was the EPC cost. Now again, this is what Pascal told me to do this. He told me that what he wants to do is when this gets transferred to another file, you want that in a different color. Is that a big deal? Maybe, but I got it. I worked it out. I wasted a lot of time on that, and that's going to be my next video. By the way, there's another video. I forgot. Not a video. You know, when you're talking about solar, I don't know if anybody uses this PV Insights thing where I go to PV Insights. Sorry for my whatever, the ADD. I have ADD or something probably. But this is right now in April, April 20th. The cost of a panel has come down for polysilicon to 174. Gosh, it's really, and you know, all these theories about it going back up again, and here's the cost of silicon, that's come down again. That's this thing that just reads it from the, so that's the backdrop really of the solar. There's this real revolution. So what I'm going to do now is take this and just do something very simple. That's how much equity up front we committed. I just went through that. And then we have to figure out how much remaining equity we have. So as long as you use kind of the opening balances, you can go to the opening balance and you need a little table. And then you can say, well, here's how much we committed minus how much we've already put in from the opening balance. And then that's it. And then I didn't emphasize the importance of this line, the funding needs, which has everything. It's just kind of like the uses of funds. And you say, okay, well, the equity funded is this much. I want to put this one much in, but what happens when this goes down? I want to put the minimum of this or that in. Now, I don't know. There might be a better way to do this. I haven't seen people do this much like this. And this is the opening balance. And then we take our equity funded and get the total one. And then when you press Shift Control R, again from the generic macros being opened with the initialize thing, you get down to the remaining. And in this case, here's the amount we want to spend. Here's the remainder. So we can only spend up to the amount we committed, and we're finished. And then we get the pro rata funding, which is just, even though I don't have it, I'll just put, it's kind of like a mini waterfall, if you want to call this some kind of cascade, upward going waterfall, or whatever the heck you do this. And then it's the key that we got these from the sources and uses. You understand, for me, if I didn't do the sources and uses of funds, I am absolutely sure, because nobody does this, you can do it without this. It's absolutely no problem. But and I didn't do this. So then we take our total pro rata funding and we multiply it by this percent. And since it's just going to be proportional, we then take this total and multiply this. I hope I remembered to press the F4, Shift Control R. I should have kind of copied that across, I guess. And then that's our funding. And then we can put our total debt funding, total equity funding. Suppose you could even put total uses here, sources, of course, and you better make sure that that total sources. Let's put it all to equal here, and then you can, do your little test, okay? And the test is just that this thing equals this thing. And you know when I'm doing this, when I'm going to do this, I'm going to have somebody else do the typing online. I'm a little bit afraid of that. I'm going to have to say, oh, come on, please do the Shift Control R. And for the sum, I'm going to put an and. This guy who I have doing it is wonderful, by the way. He's one of the best people to his students I can ever imagine. The fact that he would make an effort to get some asshole like me to work in his class. And I won't swear. I promise in that one I won't swear. So now I'm going to re-get this. I got to almost cheat. This repayment period, oh my God, I got it. It's this thing plus that. Maybe I should have kind of named it something else. This is like a period of the repayment. And we're going to need that, not now, but we're going to need that. And where can I find the flag for repayment? We're going to need that later on when we do that. So if there's a delay, this will be pushed back. And if there's not a delay, that we can do this. And then, this is kind of a little bit, I'm going to be aggressive here. And I'm going to get a ref, and I don't care. And I'm going to say, well, let's just take this repayment, and I'm going to have to change this, and take this one. This is going to be called our dynamic repayment. And our dynamic repayment is down here. I did a little table. And I think that's a good way to do it, because if you do it like this, if you do it kind of independently and cleanly, we can do sculpting. We can have a default on this later. We can, which no, you wouldn't really have because it's dynamic. And I'm going to call this dynamic payment for sculpting. Okay, and then now, and then all on this one, I hope I already named this range. You can see I put a named range here. And I named this one. And now we're going to do this painful thing where, first of all, I'm going to fix this period. This is this thing I really have a tough time. So where's our repayment flag? Oh no. Did I delete the repayment flag? Shoot. I'll show you this. How's that? It's just such a simple macro. So where am I? I'm going to say, well, if we're going to make a little macro and we're going to copy the fixed repayment into the fixed repayment, we'll copy that from the, whatever that stupid name was. Oh, this is and then we're going to do the same thing with this one. We're going to copy that. They're all numbers, so I'm going to copy that. And when I'll put it again here. Can I make a little pimples all over my sheet? Okay, so let's change something. What can we change? Let's put a downside case. And then in that downside case, I have less sculpted money. I think, I hope that worked. The base case, you can see, I hope you're looking at that graph. I keep that graph so much in sight, this graph of the CF80S versus the debt service. That's the key graph, and I remember from last time we can change it if we change this, and that was the innovation, that little thing for the what did I call it? I forgot what I called it. The find month. That's what it was. That find month. For me, that was a gigantic thing. And my friend Hetty said, I bet that doesn't work if it's quarterly. If you change this up here to make it, oops, I don't have this all finished, of course, but if you change your model and make it quarterly, how about I'll do that, okay? And then you can see it works. It still works, and you can then change the start date, and it'll still find the months that are in between these 2 months. Okay, and that's just this little find month. So I'm just re-emphasizing that. That might be the kind of both these two videos, the most useful little thing if you can get a hold of this file, or I even put it on a separate page on my website because I thought it was such a big deal. Now, when we get to this repayment thing, now this is fixed. So this is fixed now. So I think I have a downside case, and now the repayment is fixed. Now this is the big deal. Oh, I should do this. Okay, this one is all fixed, and I should have summed this, and they better be the same after we copy them, shouldn't they? And did I make something too complicated in here? Okay, excuse me for my, okay, I'm not gonna, I got fancy with some kind of little checkbox. I think the easiest way to do this is simply to fix the debt. So right now we have the same amount of fixed debt here as we have here. That was really stupid, the thing I just did, okay? And then what I do now is I say, okay, well, what happens if we have a delay case? And if we have a delay case, what happens here is that when I copied the fixed thing up here, that's all okay, but the actual amount doesn't start until this one. So what I want to do is go back over here and put this reordered, make a little reordered case and push it back to when the thing actually starts. And we say, I want to look up on this value because that's the one we're actually going to be adjusting, and then I'm going to move it with the array of our initial period by period and our initial repayment period. Ah, well, at least you can look at if you're interested, at least you can look at this. So look at this. So when we have a delay case, you notice what happens. It pushes it back. Okay, so this little lookup method, and I hope I'll remember it in the future when we put it in. Oh, you know what I just learned? I'm not going to try to do this one in the class. I'm going to screw that one. But I think that's an important little thing. So when we put a base case, we move it, and when we put a delay case, we put it back. When you do this, by the way, we're going to have to do this circular reference thing that I didn't even go through. I'll come back to that at the end. I always do the circular references kind of at the end. All right, so then when we get to our repayments, it's absolutely essential. Oh, no, we got to do one thing, repayment applied. So I made a little thing, a little checkbox that says, do you want to fix the repayments and run it for risk analysis? That's true. Or do you want to not and use the sculpted dynamic one? That's false. If we fix it, then we're simply going to do one of these things where we say if, and we press that seems to be a range name. If it's fixed, then we're going to use this reordered whole business. Otherwise, we're just going to take the initial one, which was the dynamic one. And of course, you could add other repayments here, but this dynamic versus fixed sculpting, and when I see these models, it's the sculpting is everything else is kind of all nice, and then that sculpting becomes a mess. And this, I've got too many pimples around here, don't I? So now we put our real final debt balance in, and we put our that's why I didn't do the circular references yet. We're not there. The opening balance equals the closing balance, and these draws, well, they come from up here, this thing that we just did, this debt funding. And the debt funding kind of comes after the initial equity funding. All right, that's that. And then we Whew, where am I? And then we'll put the repayments. But this repayments, I'm going to put a minimum because we're going to have a possibility for a, I just touched my face, oh no. We're going to have we're going to put the final repayment, but we never would ever pay more than the opening balance. Okay. And so put a little minimum there. And then if we have a cash sweep, that's going to come from all the way downstairs in the cash flow statement. That's a little bit more tricky to compute, not much. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the key thing here is to always get the sweep and the defaults and everything else, get that from the cash flow. Let's put the interest in. And then, of course, let's just allocate this interest. If it's the periodic, if it's the construction period up here in line 9, we're going to make it a interest during construction, and I'm going to take this total period, and if it's the operating period, let's put it as so we put the equity. I mixed up the debt and the equity percentages. Maybe in the future I'll have to remember to put the equity first and the debt last or something. Okay, and then the so when you do this, and I had some earlier videos that had some music in them, and I played, oh, my uncle's, he's the best. He plays clarinet. I never used to appreciate it. Now I do. So those were too loud, and I never put the sum function in. And the repayments and the you could put a little bit of checks. The total repayment here better equal this total repayment, and the draws better equal the repayment. And when you just kind of, you can put all your fancy, and I used to be obsessed with putting my little true falses and thought I was fancy by putting a little audit sheet on all that kind of stuff that's very standard nowadays. The real thing is to be able to look at these sum columns and kind of figure out what's going on from those, okay? So I had a mistake that I fixed, and I'm going to edit the video, and then I put the uncommitted debt, and now if you want to go through the commitment fees and all of that, you can do that. But the problem is, of course, you put back the commitment fees and the IDC, the interest during construction. You put it back up here. You can total it. You could do a copy paste over here, and then you won't get a circular reference. But when you go and put the upfront fees, and I didn't put a DSRA account, I might add that in later. But when you put them back up here, if you just took these upfront fees and made those the computed fees, that should have been a circular reference, but okay. It wasn't. It should have given me a circular reference. I'm not even going to worry. I'll try one more. There we go. Okay. Maybe it's because of that. So that you need to make a little bit of a copy and paste. I'm doing a copy and paste. See, I'm not that closed-minded. I am actually, but I did it on the total financing. So I just fixed this, and it's a very simple and a very quick, and you do a little loop and you make sure this difference goes down to 0, and I did it on the difference up here. I made sure that this goes down to 0, and I just kept copying and pasting and copying and pasting. What did I do? Did I not have to do it the financing fixed compared to the financing computed? And oh, this is embarrassing. I guess I better do this. Financing fixed. Oh, I did it with all of them. Oh, good. I see. I made a little range thing. I copied this one to compute it and blah, blah, blah. I don't want to go through this because later I'm going to put a DSRA account in here, not in this video. And I'm going to start showing you how easy it is to apply the UDF. Easy, really easy, I swear. Okay, now the let's go through the cash flow. So I skipped the little profit and loss with the taxes that I cheated on, and I'm admitting I cheated. And then let's fill in some of this. So let's fill in the interest expense. Now in the interest expense, I'm just going to give you a little preview. It's this one, but we also add, there's going to be a little default possibility. I'm going to add the interest on that. And we really should find a nice little way. I use this SUMIF to start adding things. And then we can go up and get the repayment. And this repayment, we put some minimum stuff in here, and that's going to come into play a little bit later. So we can just take this repayment straight from here. So it's a little bit, backwards, because that repayment you take from the debt schedule. The other ones you take, we'll show you in a minute, you take from this. Now, if from the cash flow statement. Now, let's fix the debt. Okay, so that copies and pastes this debt now. Okay, and then after we fix the debt, okay, after we fix the debt, we're going to, if we do this one, it's going to be sculpted, but I'm going to do this one, and then I'm going to make it really bad. I'm going to make a downside case. So now I did this on purpose, and now we have a default up here, and we have some room to repay the default. Not a whole lot of room, but let's see if we can repay the default. And by putting that fixed thing in, that's the whole kind of idea of this. Okay, and so if we have a negative amount, so you put a maximum and you put a minus on this, or 0, and you don't use an if statement. Everybody knows that. Okay, and it just plops that thing into here, and we've got a default until we go up to here. All right, and then you make a little default opening and closing balance. You put the opening balance equal to closing balance. The default is equal to the closing balance of blah, 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 the opening balance plus the default minus the closing. And this one you always would take from the cash flow statement. I couldn't see how else you could possibly do that. Okay, and that's how easy you can just throw in a default easily. Now, so we've got a default, but this is not so good because we better repay the default. Now, you could put this a little somewhere else in the cash flow statement, I guess, but I think this is all right. And you're going to repay the default when this one is greater than 0. So you always use a maximum when you're testing for a positive or negative. And you use a minimum that's much more interesting to cap it. Now, so what we do is we start repaying the default here. And we're not finished, then we go back up, blah, 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 back up to the repayment of default. And we just push this down here and get the repayment of the default. Okay, and then we copy that across. Okay, oops, and it's still not so good. That little graph is showing that I screwed up. Because here's what happens, that default balance goes negative, which is really, really good news, because we didn't have to pay the default, and that means we have some room left over to pay ourselves a little bit of a dividend, even in this downside case. So what you better do is cap this. And when you cap this, you just put a minimum around this. And you put a minimum of this, or you go to the opening balance of the debt, the default. And that's why I almost need finally I got this, I've got a headache right now. But you need a opening balance on the default for this test. If you plopped your default into the big, regular old opening balance, closing balance for our senior debt or whatever, that wouldn't work. You need a second one because exactly this. Finally, I understood it by going through it. Thank you for making me make a video, as if anybody cares. And then, we repaid the default, which is really good news. And I'm going to, I'm not going to go through this, but I could prove to you, I use this little thing to prove that when the PLCR gets equal to 1, maybe I'll do that, then it just barely, the default just barely works. So then we take our cash flow before default, we add back, excuse the default, and subtract, and that shows you how much I left over for a next step. Now, let's say over here, uh, uh, let's say up here that I put my base case in, okay, and maybe I don't really have to refix the debt, okay, because I've still, where do I have this? I've got all these little pimples up here, which are okay, I think. You don't like it, maybe. I know you don't like this. Oh, I got it here. I'm going to fix the debt. Yeah, okay, okay. And now I'm going to put a cash sweep in here. And I can put a cash sweep with all my other stuff. I can even put a cash sweep if I don't fix it. Okay, right now it's the same. And I'm going to go down here and I put in the assumptions page, I'm repeating this. And if you're getting irritated with me for repeating this, I almost think that's okay. I'm putting that and I'm making it in the left-hand column, and maybe I'll even do one of these things, copy this over to the financing model, okay? And when I do this for this class, I better keep it a hell of a lot more simple than this. And then what I can do is say, okay, well, whatever is left over, that cash flow, I'm going to sweep that. So that's the first step. And let's put a 50% cash sweep in there, okay? I didn't put the sweep on that graph, I think. That's okay. But then I also said, okay, it might be the case that we only want to turn this sweep on and off in some. So in this case, I turn this sweep on in April 1 of 16. April, no, that's not April Fool's Day. Okay, my favorite holiday. And then, but no, now I paid off too much debt. And then, so around this, we better put a minimum. And the minimum is a little bit tricky on this one because you're going to take the minimum of this, or we go to the opening balance of our account just like we did before. But this time, in the cash flow waterfall, you have already paid off this repayment over here. So you have to put a minus on that. And hopefully you won't get a circular reference. And now, if you look at the kind of summary page where I made a little better graph, I put the cash sweep in here, and let's make it, where did I put that? Let's make it 100% cash sweep. So that, then you can see that now correctly pushes the debt backwards, and the thing to really teach is that this affects the IRR on the equity, which I haven't computed yet, of course. Okay, and so that's it. And we could also, around this whole thing, put a maximum, because if this cash flow ever happened to somehow get negative, we better put a maximum of that or zero. We don't ever want a negative sweep. There are a lot of interesting things about a sweep, by the way. If you have 100% sweep, because I had a client who was in such bad shape, they had well, I don't have many clients, by the way. They had 100, and then there's no incentive to do anything anymore. If you know you're gonna, all the cash flow in the downside case is going to be swept away here. Well, that it just doesn't show it. Okay, here it's kind of all swept away. We have a default, and we have so little at the end. There's no incentive. I don't know what the answer to that one is really. Uh, 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 how to get back? Maybe you gotta lower the amount of the debt and restructure it and all that. And then finally, we have the equity cash flow. Okay, and my headache hopefully can go away now because we're just about finished. And the equity cash flow, you remember, for the students, it's the last line on this. And I know most of you don't make it like this. Most of you will put a cash flow statement altogether, but I still do it like this. Maybe that's a little old-fashioned. And then you put a minus and you find out how much equity cash flow you put in the sources and uses of fund statement. Okay. And the equity cash flow you put in the sources and uses of fund statement is the total equity funding right there. It better be, I hope it's the equity funding from the pro rata plus the equity funding from this. And then you go down and you get equal XIRR. Okay, and then you can put a comma, and then you can, of course, look and study. And this is the only time I'm going to use the end date because, oh, shit. Let's put the base case. Good. Okay. And then we can get our DSCR, which is just straight from the CFADS up here. And we can put in the debt service, which I would just, wouldn't you just put in the scheduled debt service? Scheduled, you wouldn't put the sweep in because that almost would define it. And then you could divide by that, and then you get a divide equals 0, and you go up to the denominator, and you put a greater than sign and put 0.1, and then put a comma, and then you make sure it's false, so then you can get the minimum. I thought I was done, finished, and then you can get the NPV of the cash flow. Now I use this whole business of the interest rate index here, and I the PV of the debt service better be exactly the same as the COD. And okay, what did I do? This should have started here, and we should have taken for this one the NPV, the sum product with a divide sign starting right there, and this DSCR was not exactly sculpted. I'm going to have to pause the video again. I'm going to have to cut out a lot of this, aren't I? If I take the NPV of the debt service or I take the debt at COD, that's the same thing because I just put sculpted in, and my lesson here was that put a 0 cash sweep in because the cash sweep is part of the debt service, and you better be careful because then you can't take this one. All right, and then if I want to do the PLCR, so that's the PV of the cash flow, which is again using the same sum product formula. But if I want to go forward, what you can do is you can go up to the cash flow, CFADS, and you put equals sum product. Okay, and let's take the cash flow up here and divide that by this one. Okay, and now I'm going to put a little dollar sign, which a lot of people do, just on the very last one. Okay, and then I can copy it forward, and it'll keep going. But then this will go down. And now I'm going to go over here and put the opening balance of the debt. Let's go upstairs to our debt schedule and put the opening balance of the debt right here. And then once I have the opening balance of the debt, I want that to go down. Now, if I put, to kind of prove how this works, I'm just doing a little proof. If I put the same sort of thing, sum product, and then take this debt service up here, this debt service, divide this debt service by our little factor again. Okay, we do that. And then we put a little dollar sign right on the end. Okay, look at this. If you do this, let's get to the, when is the COD? Blah, 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 blah. Oh, come on. Oh, here. This is the COD. It worked in the COD, but it didn't work in the next period. And that's because we take this PV factor and it goes up like this. And when we take the PV of the debt service, we're understating it. So here's the little trick you do. You multiply this by the prior period interest index thing. And you do that as the same thing. You do that the same thing for this one. Okay? And then when you go forward, look, it's the same every time. You've just kind of proved it. So the trick, really, the big deal is for the CFADS, if you want to go forward and compute the PLCR in each period, you've got to do that. Now, we're just going to do this when it's the operating period. And then we'll take the PV of the CFADS. I'm just going to take it divided by the debt anyway, after I did all that. But then you can see how the PV, that PLCR goes up over time. And if you have a sudden decline in cash flow and all that, you can really evaluate that. And then I put the DSCR and put some graphs, and then I'm done. And let's do two more things. Two more things to finish. Okay. The first thing to do is to press Control Alt C. And I hope this is in B and it found the column I, and I'm going to do the whole stuff. And it might take a little bit of time. Pascal said, "Oh, it's taking so long." It's not taking that long. Well, maybe it is. Okay, because it's got to go. The thing that takes a long time. Oops, I got that little thing. The thing that takes a little bit long time. It's got to go and check every stupid little cell and see if it's coming from a different sheet. This is coming from the red sheet. I hope I've got something coming from the brown sheet. You can hardly see it's brown. That brown was a bad color choice. Excuse me. Okay, and now I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to press Shift F11 and I'm going to make a content sheet. And that's another, and I'm going to press Control Alt C. I was going to put a picture of my sister psychological session at the end of this, but I'll have to do this on the next video. And then it's going to go, oops, and then it puts all of this stuff. Oh, I put some things to check, and you know, I've done this over and over again. So if I want to go to the CFADS and I want to go back, I've done this. I've got a little more work to do on this probably. I've got to make it more flexible in terms of the colors and all that. And then it also, in that little contents page, it puts a little color that you used, and you can put the file name and the last saved by. This is Hetty's very nice symbol. Okay, and that's it for this video. I finally made another goddamn